starting from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Chapter 1. The Poor Girl in the Old Suit. Clara Bennett stood in front of the glittering glass tower of Sterling Corp, feeling like she'd accidentally walked onto the set of a sci-fi movie. 50 floors, each one a reminder that she didn't belong here. The second-hand suit she bought from a charity shop was a bit tight in the shoulders, and her worn-out flats squeaked with every step, but Clara didn't have time for self-doubt. Today was her first day as an intern at the biggest financial firm in the city, and she had one goal: learn, survive, and don't do anything stupid. She pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped into the marble-floored lobby. The icy blast of air conditioning made her shiver. A group of employees in sleek, expensive suits passed by. Glancing at her with a mix of curiosity and disdain, Clara forced a smile, but a blonde woman in a tight-fitting dress whispered to a colleague, "Who let her in here? She looks like she just walked out of a thrift store." Clara gripped her thin folder tighter and told herself, "You don't need them to like you. You just need to do well." The reception desk was as wide as a stage, and the woman behind it looked like she'd stepped out of a Vogue cover. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Clara Bennett. New intern. Legal department." The receptionist typed on her keyboard and frowned. "Oh, you're the replacement. Figures they're so short-staffed they'll take anyone." She slid an employee badge across the counter. "Floor 42. Don't lose the badge, and don't wander." Clara nodded, ignoring the sarcastic tone. She stepped into the elevator, squeezing into a corner as others chatted about stocks and yachts. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, she nearly bumped into a guy in a gray suit holding a Starbucks cup. "Watch it," he snapped, then gave her a once-over. "Who are you? Delivery?" "Intern," Clara replied, voice calm but eyes sharp as blades. "Legal department." He shrugged and walked away. Clara sighed. First day, and already she was someone's punchline. Perfect. Sterling Corp's legal office looked like a maze of glass and steel, filled with open workstations and sleek conference rooms. Clara was led to a tiny corner, where her desk was a small table wedged next to a humming photocopier. Her direct supervisor, Evelyn Foster, was a stern, middle-aged woman with gold-rimmed glasses. "Miss Bennett," she said, not looking away from her screen, "I don't have time to train you. Your job is to read documents, take notes, and do what you're told. Understood?" "Understood, ma'am," Clara replied, trying to hide her excitement. As a recent law school graduate, she dreamed of working in a place like Sterling Corp, where billion-dollar deals were inked and lawyers were sharp as razors. She wasn't expecting to be treated like royalty, just hoping to learn. Her first task was to organize a towering stack of documents related to the year's biggest merger. Sterling Corp was acquiring a tech company for $3 billion. She carefully read through every page, jotting notes on complex clauses she'd studied in school. It was dry work, but Clara loved it. Each clause was a puzzle, and she was good at solving puzzles. By lunchtime, as she munched on her homemade sandwich in the break room, a colleague named Liam, the Starbucks guy from earlier, sat across from her. "Hey, second-hand girl," he sneered. "Do you even know what you're doing? This contract isn't a joke. One mistake, and the whole team's screwed." Clara stopped chewing, looked him straight in the eye. "Thanks for the advice, Liam. But if you're worried about mistakes, maybe check your own report. You got the figures wrong on page 47. Liam fell silent, his face turning red. Clara smiled and took another bite of her sandwich. 1-0. That afternoon, an unexpected event changed everything. A senior lawyer on the contract analysis team suddenly took emergency leave for family reasons, leaving a big gap just before a crucial meeting with the board. After a tense conversation with HR, Miss Evelyn pointed at Clara. "Miss Bennett, you're joining the analysis team. Your job is to read the contract and flag any issues. Don't let me down." Clara froze. "But ma'am, I'm just an intern, and you're the only one available," Evelyn cut in. "Didn't you win debate competitions in law school? Then use that brain of yours." Clara swallowed hard, heart pounding. She didn't know if this was a break or a trap, but there was no time to think. She grabbed the stack of papers and dove in like a machine. Intellectual property rights, payment terms, penalty clauses. Her head was spinning, but she missed nothing. Then, something off. A small clause buried on page 132 made her pause. It was vague, slippery, like a trap waiting to snap, but she wasn't sure. Not yet. By 6 p.m., Clara was still at her desk, eyes burning. She scribbled a short note about the clause, planning to bring it to Miss Evelyn the next morning. But deep down, she felt a strange instinct. Like this clause wasn't just an error, it was a ticking time bomb. She stood, stretched, and looked out the window. The city glowed under the nightlights. Clara gave a dry smile. Day 1, and I've been thrown into the fire, she murmured. Welcome to Sterling Corp, Clara Bennett. Chapter 2. Excuse me, but this clause is a trap. Clara Bennett walked into the conference room on the 50th floor of Sterling Corp, feeling like she was walking toward a guillotine. She clutched her folder tightly, trying to ignore the squeak of her worn flats on the gleaming wooden floor. The room was as grand as a ballroom, with a long, polished table, premium leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline, but the atmosphere was colder than the AC. A dozen executives in designer suits sat upright, eyes fixed on a massive screen filled with numbers and charts. At the head of the table sat Mason Sterling, CEO of Sterling Corp, with eyes sharp as razors. Evelyn led Clara in and pointed to the last seat at the far end of the table, next to a lukewarm coffee pot. Sit still, take notes, and don't speak unless spoken to, she whispered, her voice tight as wire. Clara nodded, but her gut was still knotted from the clause on page 132. She'd read it 3 more times before the meeting, and each time the unease grew stronger. The meeting began with a presentation from Victor Klein, head of legal. He spoke about the $3 billion merger with Apex Innovations, his tone as confident as a yacht salesman. This contract is a masterpiece, Klein declared, gesturing at the screen. Every clause has been combed through. Apex will be ours, and their intellectual property will be the crown jewel of Sterling Corp's portfolio. The directors nodded approvingly, some even clapping lightly. Clara lowered her head and quickly flipped to page 132 of the printed contract. Clause 17, 4b, written in tangled legal jargon, stated that Apex would retain temporary exclusive usage rights over some of their core patents for 5 years post-merger, but a tiny sentence at the bottom sent a chill through her spine. Those rights could be extended indefinitely if Apex met certain technical conditions, which were never clearly defined. To Clara, this wasn't a typo. This was a trap. She glanced at Evelyn, hoping for permission to speak, but Evelyn was busy jotting down notes. Clara bit her lip. I'm just an intern. If I say something stupid, I'm finished. Then she remembered her mother's words. The truth doesn't wait for courage, Clara. She took a deep breath and gripped her pen tighter. Excuse me, Clara said aloud, her voice clear but slightly trembling. The room fell dead silent. Klein paused mid-sentence, turning as if she'd interrupted a symphony. I believe there's a problem in clause 17. 4b. Every eye turned toward Clara. Her throat felt dry, but she pressed on. This clause allows Apex to maintain exclusive rights to the core patents indefinitely based on vague conditions. If we sign this, Sterling Corp risks losing the most valuable asset in this deal, our intellectual property. She paused, then said firmly, Excuse me, but this clause is a trap. Silence. One director cleared his throat. Klein's jaw dropped, his face red as a tomato. Clara glanced toward Mason Sterling, and her heart stopped. He was staring at her, unblinking, with an expression cold as ice. No smile, no frown, just a granite wall in an Armani suit. An intern, right? Klein finally spoke, oozing sarcasm. You think you're smarter than the entire legal team that worked on this for 3 months? Clara swallowed but didn't flinch. I'm not saying the legal team isn't competent. I'm saying this clause has a loophole. If Apex exploits it, we could lose hundreds of millions. Enough, Klein barked. You have no authority to speak here. Evelyn, how are you managing your intern? Evelyn's face paled. She turned to Clara. Bennett, out now. Clara stood, legs shaky. She gathered her documents, keeping her head high, though it felt like the weight of the world was pressing on her shoulders. As she passed Mason, she could feel his eyes still on her, but this time there was something else in his gaze. Curiosity, or just her imagination. The door slammed shut behind her. Clara stood alone in the hallway, heart pounding. What did I just do? She whispered. She imagined being fired, escorted out of Sterling Corp after just 2 days. But deep down, she knew she wasn't wrong. That clause was a ticking time bomb, and she couldn't pretend she didn't see it. Inside the boardroom, tension still crackled in the air. Klein resumed his presentation, but his voice had lost its swagger. A few directors exchanged whispers, Occasionally glancing at Clara's now empty seat, Mason remained silent, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and icy. "Klein, explain Clause 17. 4b right now," Klein stammered, flipping pages. "Sir, it's just a technical detail. Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about?" Mason cut in, voice sharp as a blade. "An intern just claimed we could lose intellectual property rights. Is she wrong, or did your legal team miss something?" The room froze again. Klein wiped sweat from his forehead, scrambling. "I'll review it, sir." Mason said nothing. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and left the room without another word. But in his mind, he couldn't stop replaying the moment. The girl in the outdated suit, bold enough to interrupt a boardroom full of suits. Clara Bennett, he thought. Either she's a genius or the dumbest person I've ever met. Chapter 3. Troublemaker or Brave Soul. Clara Bennett sat at her tiny desk beside the photocopier, eyes glued to her computer screen, though her mind was miles away. 2 days had passed since the fateful meeting on the 50th floor, and she still hadn't been called into HR to be formally fired. That, in a strange way, was even more terrifying. Every footstep in the hallway made her jump, half expecting Evelyn to appear and deliver the final blow to her short-lived career at Sterling Corp. "What was I thinking?" she muttered, tapping her fingers nervously on the desk. "Interrupting the head of legal in front of the CEO. I've probably broken the stupidity record for the year." Her co-workers weren't helping her nerves. Liam, the Starbucks guy, had already spread the story of the reckless intern across the 42nd floor. Every time he passed her desk, he smirked. "Still breathing? Second-hand girl? I'm betting your badge gets revoked by Friday." Clara only gave him a tired smile, but inside she was counting down the hours. She needed this job, not just to pay rent, but to afford her mother's medication for chronic arthritis. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor, Mason Sterling sat in an office as grand as a penthouse, skimming the report in front of him, but he wasn't really reading. His mind was occupied by one name: Clara Bennett, the girl in the worn-out suit who had stood up in a boardroom full of executives and called Clause 17, 4b, a trap, arrogant, insubordinate, or just right. Mason didn't like surprises. He'd built Sterling Corp from a startup into a financial empire by controlling everything: numbers, deals, people. But Clara Bennett was a variable he hadn't accounted for. "Ethan," Mason said in a low voice. His assistant appeared almost instantly. "Find out everything about Clara Bennett, intern, legal department. I want a full report." Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. "Yes, sir. When do you need it?" "By tomorrow morning," Mason replied, eyes still fixed on the window. He didn't say it aloud, but deep down he was intrigued. Who was this girl bold enough to challenge his entire system? The next morning, Ethan laid a slim folder on Mason's desk. Clara Bennett, Fidoshi, graduated from a public law school on a full scholarship, won 3 national debate championships, served as a student representative on the university board, no social media presence, no scandals, volunteers at an education center for underprivileged kids. He paused, voice softening. She's caring for her sick mother, chronic arthritis. They live in a rental apartment in the slums. Mason flipped through the file, pausing at a photo of Clara at a debate competition, standing on stage, eyes sharp, pointing with conviction, like she was trying to persuade the world. He felt a jolt of energy course through him. It wasn't her beauty, though her bright brown eyes and defiant smile were hard to ignore. It was her presence, that rare sense of principle in a world full of agendas. "Anything else?" Mason asked, voice calm, but his eyes sharper now. Ethan cleared his throat. She turned down an offer from a major law firm because they represented a corporation accused of fraud. She said. Ethan glanced at the document, and I quote, "I won't work for liars." This was in a school paper interview. Mason laughed, an uncharacteristically warm sound that made Ethan blink. "She really said that?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, trying not to smile. Mason closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Clara Bennett wasn't just smart. She had integrity, something he hadn't seen in years. Buried under billion-dollar deals and calculated handshakes. He recalled her eyes in that boardroom, unflinching, even when the whole room turned against her. She's a troublemaker, he thought, or the only one brave enough to speak the truth. Chapter 4. The CEO's Personal Interrogation. Clara Bennett stood before the gleaming wooden door to Mason Sterling's office, her heart pounding like it wanted to escape her chest. She'd mentally prepared for every possible scenario: being fired, being berated, or worse, being sued for unparalleled arrogance. Her second-hand suit was still tight in the shoulders, and she debated whether to apologize up front or just silently accept her fate. But when she knocked and heard his cold, commanding voice, "Come in," she knew there was no turning back. Mason's office was the size of a small soccer field, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. He sat behind a massive wooden desk, black suit perfectly tailored, eyes sharp as blades. In front of him sat a cup of black coffee and a file. Clara recognized instantly her background file. Great, she thought. He's investigated me. This isn't a conversation. It's a sentencing. Sit, Mason ordered, pointing to the leather chair across from him. Clara sat, keeping her spine straight, even though she wanted to curl up. She glanced around. No assistant, no HR rep, just her and the most powerful CEO in the city. "Miss Bennett," Mason began, his voice calm but heavy, like an oncoming storm. "Do you make a habit of interrupting heads of legal during key meetings, or was that just a spontaneous hobby?" Clara swallowed hard, but her gaze didn't waver. "Sir, I didn't interrupt for fun. I did it because Clause 17, 4B, could cost Sterling Corp its intellectual property. I assumed you'd prefer truth over a room full of nodding heads." Mason raised an eyebrow, a subtle move that felt like she'd just taken a misstep on a chessboard. "Truth," he echoed, voice tinged with sarcasm. "You, an intern with less than 3 days of experience, believe you know more than a legal team that worked on this for 3 months? Clara clenched her fists under the table, but smiled a polite, slightly defiant smile. "Sir, I'm not saying the legal team is incompetent. I'm saying they missed a trap, and if I saw it and stayed silent, I wouldn't deserve to be in that room." Mason tilted his head, something flickering in his gaze, curiosity or annoyance. "You're very confident," he said, "or very foolish. You to realize embarrassing, Mr. Powdov. Klein in front of the board has consequences. I could fire you right now. Then why haven't you?" Clara blurted and instantly regretted it. "God, Clara. Did you just say that out loud?" Silence. Mason stared at her, unblinking, as if analyzing a flawed contract. Then, suddenly, he laughed, a low, short sound that stunned Clara. She hadn't imagined Mason Sterling could laugh. For a moment, he looked almost human. "You've got guts, Bennett," he said, the smile vanishing as quickly as it appeared. "But guts won't save you if you're wrong. Explain Clause 17, 4B. If you can't convince me, you'll be out of Sterling Corp before noon." Clara took a deep breath, the old feeling of standing on a debate stage washing over her. She opened her folder and flipped to page 132. "This clause grants Apex exclusive rights to core patents for 5 years. But there's a line that allows it to be extended indefinitely, based on undefined technical conditions. If Apex exploits that, they could hold on to the patents forever. Sterling Corp would lose the most valuable asset of the merger." Mason glanced at the page, but his eyes never left her face. "You're sure? That's a serious accusation." "Absolutely," Clara replied, voice steady. "I've reviewed it 4 times. If you'd like, I can write up a detailed analysis. But I'm betting you already had doubts about this clause, too, didn't you?" Mason's body stiffened, his expression darkening. "Are you implying I knowingly overlooked a trap?" Clara flinched. "Too far. No, sire. I just meant you're sharp. If I caught it, I believe you might have suspected something, too." Mason tapped his fingers on the desk, each tap like a war drum. "You're good at flattery," he said, voice laced with irony. "But don't play psychology with me, Bennett. I'm not your law school debate opponent." Clara flushed but didn't back down. "I'm not playing games. I just don't want Sterling Corp to get blindsided. If that costs me my job, then at least I tried." Mason stared at her so long she felt time itself pause. Finally, he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "You've put me in a difficult position, Bennett," he said quietly. "If I keep you, legal will revolt. If I fire you, I admit you were wrong, and I'm not sure you are." Clara pressed her lips together, keeping her voice even. "You can review the clause yourself. If I'm wrong, you can fire me later." Mason turned, his gaze sharp, but tinged with something else. "You're a headache," he said, but his tone had softened. "Fine. You have 48 hours to submit a detailed analysis of this clause. If it's convincing, you stay. If not, you know the drill." Clara nodded. heart lifting a little. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," Mason cut in, settling back into his chair. "And next time you decide to blow up a boardroom, at least wear a suit that fits." Clara blinked, then laughed before she could stop herself. "I'll note that, sir, but second-hand suits get the job done." Mason raised an eyebrow, and this time a hint of a smile tugged at his lips, a brief flicker, but enough to leave Clara stunned. "Out before I change my mind." Clara left the office, light on her feet. She wasn't fired. Not yet. But as she returned to the 42nd floor, she realized something else. Mason Sterling wasn't just terrifying. He was interesting. And though she wouldn't admit it out loud, part of her was already looking forward to their next battle. Chapter 5. The Reluctant Ally. Clara Bennett sat at her tiny desk beside the photocopier, eyes burning from 2 sleepless nights spent writing the analysis of Clause 17. 4b. She'd submitted the report to Mason Sterling right on time, mentally including an imaginary cup of coffee to soften the notoriously cold CEO, but this morning, when she opened her email, one message nearly made her spill her water. "Ms. Bennett, report to the CEO's office at 8A-M. Do not be late." "What now?" Clara muttered, checking her watch. 7:45. She grabbed her folder, adjusted her second-hand suit, and sprinted to the elevator. Liam, the Starbucks guy, passed by with a smirk. "Off to see the big boss again?" "You really do love digging your own grave." Clara shot him a glare but wasn't sure herself. Was she walking into a promotion or a disaster? On the 50th floor, Mason Sterling's office was just as cold and luxurious as last time. He sat behind his desk, gray suit immaculate, eyes scanning Clara's analysis. When she entered, he didn't look up, just gestured for her to sit. Clara swallowed hard, trying to ignore the tension in the air. "Sir," she began, "if this is about the report." "You were right," Mason cut in, his voice low and sharp. He slid the analysis across the desk. "Clause 17. 4b is a trap. Apex's legal team planted it. If you hadn't spoken up, Sterling Corp could have lost hundreds of millions." Clara blinked. "Stunne. So, I'm not getting fired?" Mason raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Don't celebrate yet. You've given me more headaches than help." Before Clara could respond, the door burst open. Evelyn Foster stepped in, followed by Victor Klein, head of legal, face flushed red. "Mr. Sterling." Klein began, voice shaky. "We've just identified another issue in the Apex contract, the technology transfer clause. It's vague. If we sign, we could be sued." Mason drummed his fingers on the desk, each tap a blow to someone's career. "Vague," he repeated, voice like ice. "Klein, how does your team miss 2 loopholes in one contract?" Klein wiped sweat from his brow, flustered. Evelyn cleared her throat and glanced at Clara. "Sir." "Ms. Bennett has proven capable of spotting issues. Perhaps she could assist in reviewing the rest of the contract." Clara's mouth fell open, but Mason spoke first. "Bennett, an intern?" He turned to her, eyes filled with both skepticism and something else. "Do you think you're up for it, Bennett?" Clara clenched her fists under the table, heart pounding. This was either a golden opportunity or a trap. "Sir," she said firmly, "I can't promise perfection, but I can promise honesty. If something's wrong, I'll find it." Mason stared at her so long she thought he'd say no. Then he exhaled. "Fine. You and I will go through the contract. But if you waste my time, Bennett, you won't like the consequences." Clara nodded, suppressing a smile. Working with Mason Sterling, she wasn't sure whether to be thrilled or terrified. That afternoon, Clara sat across from Mason in a small conference room, surrounded by thick stacks of legal documents. The tension between them was palpable, broken only by the sound of pages turning and the occasional sigh from Mason. Clara focused on the technology transfer clause. Carefully making notes, she spotted a vague phrase, "conditional transfer," that Apex could exploit to delay delivering critical source codes. "Take a look," Clara said, sliding the document across the table. "This phrase doesn't define the conditions. If Apex drags it out, we might not get the source codes for years." Mason skimmed the page, frowning. "You sure? That might just be standard phrasing." Clara smiled, polite but firm. "Sir, in law, there's no such thing as standard. Every word is a weapon, and this one's a loaded gun." Mason looked at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You're a handful, Bennett," he said, but his tone had softened. "All right, draft a revision. I want this phrasing crystal clear. Clara nodded and dove into work. They stayed late, volleying ideas at a rapid pace. Clara was surprised to find that Mason wasn't just sharp. He was surprisingly open-minded, at least when it came to contracts. He asked incisive questions but listened carefully when she explained. At times, she caught him looking at her longer than necessary, his gaze no longer cold, but searching. "You know," Clara said during a rare lull, "you'd make a decent lawyer. You interrogate better than most of my professors." Mason raised an eyebrow, lips twitching. "Was that a compliment or an insult, Bennett?" "A little of both," she replied, winking before she could stop herself. She blushed, but Mason simply chuckled, a low sound that made her heart skip. At 10 p.m., they finalized the contract revision. Mason read it over and nodded. "Good," he said. "You don't just talk big, Bennett. You have real skill." Clara smiled, but shook her head. "It's not about skill, sir. I just don't want anyone to get tricked. Not Sterling Corp, not anyone." Mason looked at her, his gaze softening. "Honesty," he said quietly. "That's rarer than talent around here." Clara didn't respond, but a warmth bloomed in her chest. As she packed up her materials, Mason suddenly asked, "Have you ever considered working here long-term?" Clara froze, turning back. "Sir, I'm just trying to survive the week." Mason laughed. For the third time that day, a personal record. "You'll survive, Bennett, but don't get cocky. We've got plenty more contracts to review." Clara walked out of the room, head spinning. She hadn't just kept her job. She'd made Mason Sterling laugh. But as she stepped into the elevator, a more alarming realization hit her. His voice, his gaze, his presence were starting to get under her skin. "Don't go there, Clara," she warned herself. "He's the CEO, and you're the second-hand girl." Back in the conference room, Mason stared at the documents, but his mind wasn't on the contract. He thought about Clara, her defiant smile, her unflinching honesty. For the first time in years, his heart stirred, not because of a billion-dollar deal, but because of a girl in a worn-out suit. Chapter 6. The X returns and old wounds reopen. 2 months at Sterling Corp had transformed Clara Bennett from a nervous intern into an essential part of the 42nd floor. She hadn't just survived her run-ins with Mason Sterling. She'd made the famously icy CEO laugh, especially when she teased him about how he read contracts like love letters. Their sharp, witty banter during late-night reviews made Clara's heart race more than she liked to admit. She kept telling herself it was nothing a poor girl in a second-hand suit had no business dreaming about Mason Sterling, but his gaze, growing warmer by the day, made it impossible not to hope. Whispers started circling the office. Liam, the Starbucks guy, spread rumors that the second-hand girl was seducing the boss. Clara ignored it as best she could. But every time Mason appeared on the 42nd floor to check on documents, the stares intensified. That morning, Evelyn called Clara into her office. "You're required to attend the company gala tonight with the legal team," she said. Her tone clipped. "Mr. Sterling requested your presence." Clara was stunned. Company galas were all about gowns and champagne, not her scene. But she nodded, borrowed a deep blue dress from her roommate, and made a few careful alterations. At the Grand Hotel, Clara stepped into the chandelier-lit ballroom, dazzled by the opulence. Mason, perfect in a black tuxedo, was chatting with shareholders. When he spotted her, his eyes lit up. "You look impressive, Bennett," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Clara blushed. "Impressive like still employed, or should I have stuck with my old suit?" Mason chuckled, voice low and rich. "Impressive like I'd like to ask you for a dance." Before Clara could respond, a sharp female voice cut in. "Mason, you've always had a way with words, haven't you?" A woman in a tight red dress, blonde curls perfectly styled, strode over with confidence that could command any room. She was stunning, like someone pulled straight from a magazine. Mason stiffened, his smile vanishing. "Serena," he said, voice suddenly cold. "What are you doing here?" Serena Caldwell, successful attorney and Mason's ex, smiled like a queen returning to her throne. "I'm the new advisor on the Apex deal, and naturally, I wanted to see you again." Her gaze slid to Clara. "And you are?" "Clara Bennett, legal intern," Clara replied, calm but clutching her clutch a little too tightly. "Intern?" Serena scoffed. "How adorably. Just remember your place, sweetheart." Mason frowned, about to speak, but Serena linked her arm through his and led him away. Clara stood there, her chest tight. She looked at Serena so polished, so confident, and wondered what she had ever been thinking. The next day, Serena was officially appointed as senior legal advisor, and she wasted no time targeting Clara. During a meeting, she dumped a stack of documents on Clara's desk. "You're the rising star, right? Let's see how long you shine. I need this reviewed in 24 hours. Clara worked until T-0 M to finish, only for Serena to accidentally misplace the report. Evelyn reprimanded Clara harshly for being irresponsible. Things worsened when Serena began spreading rumors that Clara only kept her job because of a questionable relationship with Mason. The whispers on the 42nd floor sharpened like knives. Liam sneered. "You think clinging to Mason's arm is a win? Serena will eat you alive." The breaking point came the following week. A confidential internal document tied to the Apex deal was leaked online, causing chaos within Sterling Corp. At an emergency board meeting, Serena stood confidently before the directors. "I found an email sent from Ms. Bennett's workstation, sharing the document externally," she announced, presenting a printed copy. "She may be an intern, but she clearly had motive." Clara felt her heart stop. "I didn't do this," she said, voice trembling. "I don't even have clearance for that document." Serena shrugged. "You can say whatever you want, but the evidence speaks. Mason, you can't let this slide." Clara turned to Mason, desperate for the man she thought knew her. They had worked together for 2 months. He knew her integrity, but Mason only looked at her, his face unreadable. "Bennett," he said quietly, "do you have anything else to say?" Clara swallowed hard, holding back tears. "Sir, I swear I didn't do it. I would never betray this company. You know me." Mason tapped his fingers against the table. The silence stretched. Finally, he turned to Evelyn. "Escort Miss Bennett out. HR will handle it." Clara's heart shattered. Evelyn led her from the room. Serena's smug glare and Mason's cold silence cut deeper than words. By that afternoon, Clara received an HR email. Termination due to severe breach of confidentiality. No hearing, no chance to explain, no goodbye. She packed up her desk, hands shaking. Liam walked past and shook his head. "Told you, you can't beat Serena." Clara didn't reply. She just wanted to get out away from the stairs, from the humiliation, from Mason's memory. As she stepped out of Sterling Corp's glittering tower, the city still sparkled with light. But to Clara, it was all darkness. She thought of her mother, of the dream to become an honest lawyer, and of Mason, the man she trusted. "He didn't believe me," she thought as a tear rolled down her cheek. She hadn't quit. She'd been fired, framed, abandoned. Up on the 50th floor, Mason sat at his desk, staring at Clara's termination email. His jaw clenched, eyes clouded. "Serena Intern." Smiling. "You made the right call, Mason. She didn't belong here." Mason didn't respond. He could still see Clara's eyes, betrayed, hurt, pleading. A part of him doubted Serena's evidence, but it had seemed so clear, or had he been wrong? When Serena left, Mason stood by the window, unease gnawing at his gut. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the thrill of a corporate victory. Instead, it felt like he had just lost the one thing that truly mattered. Chapter 7. Clara disappears and Mason unravels. 3 weeks had passed since Clara Bennett was fired from Sterling Corp, and Mason Sterling was no longer himself. On the surface, he remained the impeccably dressed, composed CEO. But those closest to him noticed the cracks. He spoke less. His gaze drifted more often, and the rare smiles that used to escape when Clara teased him about reading contracts like love poems had vanished entirely. Every night, Mason was haunted by the image of her eyes red, voice trembling as she swore her innocence in that fateful meeting. He had tried to convince himself he'd made the right call, that the evidence Serena Caldwell presented an email from Clara's computer leaking internal documents was irrefutable. But every time he saw Clara's betrayed expression in his mind, a crack deepened in the fortress he'd built around his control. He missed her desperately. Meanwhile, Sterling Corp was spiraling. The document leak had shaken investor confidence. Tabloids were feasting on scandal, and the $3 billion merger with Apex Innovations was on the verge of collapse. Serena, now senior legal advisor, acted busy managing the fallout, but Mason's instincts started to scream. She was too polished, too smug, just like she was 4 years ago, when she'd betrayed him for a high-paying post at a rival firm. That morning, Ethan, his personal assistant, entered Mason's office, looking tense. "Sir, the IT team found a new trail of leaked emails. They weren't from Ms. Bennett. They were from Ms. Caldwell," he said, setting a file on Mason's desk. "They traced everything. The email framing Ms. Bennett was fabricated. Caldwell used her access to plant the evidence, and she sent confidential Apex data to a competitor, possibly for personal gain. Mason flipped through the documents, jaw clenching. Line after line confirmed it. Serena hadn't just framed Clara. She had deliberately sabotaged Sterling Corp. One email even detailed her plan to delay technology transfers so Apex could retain core patents, the very loophole Clara had flagged. His vision darkened. Serena hadn't just betrayed him again. She had destroyed the one person who dared to speak the truth. "Get legal in the conference room," Mason said, his voice like ice, recalling a press conference this afternoon. Ethan hesitated. "Sir, about Ms. Ed. Bennett. HR says she left the city right after she was fired. Her apartment is empty. No one knows where she went." Mason went still, like he'd just taken a punch to the gut. "Left the city?" he repeated hoarsely. 3 weeks. She'd been gone for 3 weeks, and he had done nothing but believe a lie. "Find her," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Search everywhere her school. Volunteer centers. Hospitals. I don't care what it takes." Ethan nodded and rushed out. Mason summoned the legal team. Serena entered confidently, but her eyes flicked nervously when she saw the folder on the table. "Mason, what's the urgency?" she asked sweetly. He shoved the file toward her. "Explain," he said, each syllable like a bullet. "Why did you forge an email to frame Clara Bennett? Why did you leak confidential information to our competitor?" Serena paled but tried to recover. "Mason, you're misunderstanding. I was protecting the company." "Enough," Mason snapped, standing. The room fell silent. "You betrayed me 4 years ago, Serena. I forgave you. But this," he pointed at the file, "you didn't just damage Sterling Corp. You destroyed an innocent person. Clara Bennett warned us about the trap in that contract, and you repaid her by making her the scapegoat." Serena opened her mouth, voice trembling. "You don't have solid proof." "The proof is right here," Mason barked, slamming the file down. "You're finished." He turned to Evelyn. "Remove Miss Caldwell from all projects. HR will terminate her immediately. Serena Panitst." "Mason, you can't. I'm the best you've got." "No," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "The best was the woman you ran off. Get out." As Serena was escorted out, Mason's rage gave way to guilt. He'd let Clara take the fall. He'd watched her walk away, devastated and alone. He thought of her defiant smile, the sparkle in her eye when she joked that he was the worst lawyer on earth. His chest ached. He hadn't just made a mistake. He'd failed the one person who made him want to be better. That afternoon, the Sterling Corp press room was packed with reporters and flashing cameras. Mason stood at the podium, eyes blazing. "Sterling Corp is officially withdrawing from the merger with Apex Innovations," he announced. "We've discovered acts of fraud, both from our partner and from someone within our own ranks. We will pursue legal action and overhaul internal procedures to ensure justice." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Sterling, who leaked the documents?" Mason gripped the microphone. "A senior advisor framed Clara Bennett, an employee who tried to warn us she was treated unfairly. And he paused, his voice tightening. "I failed to believe her. And for that, I apologize." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Mason Sterling apologizing, it was unprecedented. "She is the most honest person I've ever worked with," he added, "and Sterling Corp owes her." Back in his office, Mason could think only of Clara. Ethan entered, shaking his head. "Sir, we checked her old apartment. Neighbors say she and her mother moved out 2 weeks ago. No forwarding address. The volunteer center hasn't seen her." Mason clenched his fists, helpless for the first time in his life. 3 weeks she was gone, and he had done nothing to stop it. "Keep looking," he ordered. "Try her school, hospitals, anywhere she ever mentioned." Ethan hesitated. "Sir, what if she doesn't want to be found?" Mason turned, eyes burning. "Then I'll find her anyway. I owe her the truth and more." That night, Mason sat alone, staring at the city lights. He remembered the moment Clara had interrupted the boardroom meeting, her voice clear and unshakable. "This clause is a trap." She had been right about the contract, about Serena, and about him, a man trapped by power and doubt. He'd lost control, not of his company, but of the one thing that had truly mattered. Clara. In a small town hours away, Clara sat in a dimly lit motel room, the flickering lamp casting shadows on her weary face. Beside her, her mother slept peacefully, unaware of her daughter's quiet anguish. Clara stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She thought of Mason, his rare smiles, the warmth in his eyes. He didn't believe me, she thought. She'd wanted to explain, to fight. But there had been no chance. He chose not to trust me, she thought, and now she couldn't go back, not even if she wanted to. Chapter 8. Searching where no one thought to look. For 3 weeks after her dismissal from Sterling Corp., Clara Bennett lived with a quiet fire smoldering in her chest. As a young lawyer, she had spent years forging a career grounded in integrity. She once declined a lucrative offer from a top law firm because they represented a corporation accused of environmental fraud, and yet, at Sterling Corp., she had been branded a thief. A traitor not just fired, but defamed. Each night, she lay on a narrow mattress in a cramped room in a small town far from the city, listening to her mother's steady breathing beside her, and wondered, why is the truth so fragile? Serena Caldwell's counterfeit smile and forged evidence had reduced her to a villain. But worse than the false accusations was the betrayal by Mason Sterling, the man she once trusted, the man who once made her heart race. He had turned away, eyes cold, judgment final. The pain wasn't just losing a job. It was being abandoned by the very system she had vowed to uphold. Still, Clara didn't break. She found solace teaching children at a local community center, offering her heart where she could, and told herself, if I can't be a lawyer anymore, I'll still be honest. I'll still be me. Meanwhile, Mason Sterling had become a man haunted. He was used to control deals, mergers, power. But Clara, the second-hand girl with a fire in her eyes and truth on her tongue, had broken every rule in his meticulously ordered world, and he had broken her. He had believed Serena. He had sent Clara away, and now every day without her was a reminder of the gravest mistake of his life. His team scoured the city, her old apartment, the hospital where her mother had received treatment, the volunteer center where she once worked. Nothing. Neighbors said Clara and her mother had vanished, days after her termination. No forwarding address, no trace. Mason was nearly out of hope when Ethan, his assistant, found a faint lead. A community education center in the suburbs, Ethan said, laying down a file. She used to volunteer there when she was in school. She mentioned it once in an old interview. Mason didn't hesitate. He canceled his meetings and drove 2 hours through sprawling fields to a quiet town. The center was a low white building with peeling paint and a playground overrun with weeds. As Mason stepped out of his gleaming Bentley, children paused their soccer game to stare. One boy yelled, "Mister, are you lost? This ain't no coffee shop." Mason offered a faint smile, a rarity these days. "I'm looking for Clara Bennett," he said, voice low but steady. "Is she here?" The boy shrugged, pointing at the building. "She's teaching inside, but you better be careful. She doesn't like strangers." Mason's heart pounded harder than it had in years. He stepped inside the building and found a small, crowded classroom. Clara stood before a whiteboard, dressed simply in a button-up shirt and jeans, her hair tied up. She was explaining a math problem, voice warm and patient. "If you divide 12 apples evenly among 4 people," she said with a smile, "how many apples does each person get?" A little girl raised her hand, and Clara's grin widened. It stopped Mason cold. She was still Clara, brilliant, compassionate, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes now, and he had put it there. Then she looked up, and their eyes locked. Clara froze. The piece of chalk slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. The children turned, curious. "Miss Clara, who's that?" a boy asked. Clara's voice was tight. "Do your worksheets. I'll be right back." She walked outside, Mason trailing her to the hallway, arms crossed, eyes steely. She faced him. "Mr. Sterling, what are you doing here?" Mason drew in a deep breath, steadying himself. "I need to talk to you about what happened." "There's nothing to say." She cut him off, her voice trembling. "I was framed. I was fired. And you didn't believe me. I've started over. Please leave me alone." Mason clenched his fists, pain washing over him. "Clara, I was wrong. Serena faked the evidence. She leaked the documents and blamed you. I fired her. Canceled the Apex deal. I held a press conference. I told the world the truth. He apologized." Clara blinked, tears rising, but she turned her head. "You apologized in the press. Good for you. But it doesn't erase 3 weeks of shame. It doesn't erase the way you looked at me like I was a liar." Mason stepped closer, his voice low and raw. "I know I let you suffer. I lost someone irreplaceable. When you left, the company lost its best mind. And he met her eyes. I lost my heart." Clara's breath hitched. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to push him away. But those words shattered something inside her. "You don't get to say that," she whispered. "You're Mason Sterling. I'm just the second-hand girl. We don't belong in the same world." Mason shook his head, his expression stripped of all pretense. "You're wrong. You're the only person who ever made me feel real. You made me laugh. You made me question everything I thought I knew. I don't want a world without you in it." Clara wiped her tears but stepped back. "I can't come back, Mason. Not after everything. I need time." Mason nodded, though it nearly tore him apart. "I'll wait as long as it takes, but let me fix what I broke. The Sterling Corp needs you. I need you." Clara didn't answer. She turned and walked back into the classroom. The children looked up, and one girl asked, "Miss Clara, is that your boyfriend?" Clara laughed softly, though her chest was heavy. "No, sweetheart. Just someone I used to know." Mason returned to his car but didn't drive away right away. He stared at the rundown building, watching the silhouette of Clara inside, teaching, smiling despite everything. He had found her, but he hadn't won her back. Not yet. As he turned the key in the ignition, a fire reignited in his chest. He wasn't giving up. Clara Bennett wasn't just the best person he'd ever worked with. She was the one thing in his world he could never afford to lose again. Inside the classroom, Clara picked up the chalk and tried to focus, but Mason's words echoed in her mind. "I lost my heart." She didn't want to believe him. She didn't want to hope, but somehow a small spark had begun to glow again. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to give up completely. Chapter 9. A new contract, no hidden clauses. A week had passed since the tearful encounter at the Community Education Center, and Clara Bennett still couldn't erase Mason Sterling's words from her mind. "When you left, the company lost its best, and I lost my heart." She tried to stay focused, teaching children, caring for her mother in the tiny motel room that had become their temporary home. But every night, the pain from those 3 weeks clawed its way back. She had been framed, fired without a chance to defend herself, and worse than the injustice itself was being judged by Mason, someone she once admired, even trusted. As a lawyer, Clara had always believed that everyone deserved a fair defense, but at Sterling Corp, she was denied even a hearing. Serena Caldwell had fabricated evidence, and Mason had chosen to believe it. It wasn't just her career that had been destroyed. It was her faith in the system she once swore to protect. That morning, a sleek black car rolled to a stop in front of the community center, drawing whispers from the children playing outside. Clara was erasing the whiteboard when she heard the commotion. She stepped out, heart racing, and there he was, Mason, in a fitted gray suit, standing in the sun among a swarm of curious kids. "Hey, Miss Clara," a boy shouted. "The coffee guy's back. What does he want now?" Clara folded her arms, voice firm. "Mr. Sterling, I told you I need time." Mason gave a faint, sincere smile. "I know. I'm not here to pressure you. I'm here to offer a chance to make things right." He extended a thin folder toward her. On the front, employment contract, Clara Bennett, Senior Legal Counsel. Clara blinked. "Stunad. Senior Counsel? You're serious?" "I was an intern. Fired without a single word of defense." Mason's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. "I was wrong to let that happen, Clara. Serena faked the evidence, and I didn't give you a chance to speak. I want to make that right with this." He gestured to the folder. "This is the most honest contract I've ever drafted. No loopholes, no traps. And I want you to revise it like you've always fixed my mistakes." Clara opened the folder, hands trembling. The contract offered a salary 10 times her internship pay, full medical coverage for her mother, and a clause that made her throat tighten. Any employee accused of misconduct is entitled to a fair hearing before any disciplinary action is taken. She looked at Mason, eyes wavering. "That clause, was that your idea?" "Yours," he said quietly. "You once told me, a lawyer doesn't just protect contracts. They protect the truth. I want Sterling Corp to reflect that. And I need you to make sure it does." Clara pressed her lips together, her anger and heartbreak bubbling to the surface. "You don't get it, Mason. I've spent my whole life fighting for what's right. I once turned down a high-powered law firm because they helped bury an environmental fraud case. And yet, at Sterling Corp, I was labeled a thief, fired without a word. Do you really think one contract can erase that humiliation?" Mason stepped closer, voice low and urgent. "No, I don't. But I know I lost the most important person in my life because I didn't listen. You taught me that truth matters more than power. If you don't come back, Sterling Corp will lose its best mind. And me?" He met her chaza. I'll lose the only reason I've ever had to smile. Clara couldn't help it. She laughed through the tears threatening her eyes. You really do know how to negotiate. So, will you fix the contract? Mason asked, eyes sparkling. I'll review it, Clara said, her voice soft but steady, but I'm not promising anything. 3 days later, Clara walked through Sterling Corp's doors, wearing a simple tailored suit, no longer second-hand, but not flashy either. Just her. She had revised the contract, adding more clauses about due process and internal transparency. When she stepped onto the 42nd floor, the office went silent. Then a few co-workers clapped. Liam, the former Starbucks cynic, muttered, "Second-hand girl's the big boss now. Guess I lost that bet." Clara smiled, but kept walking. Her real test waited on the 50th floor. That afternoon, Mason held a press conference in the Sterling Corp lobby. Packed with reporters and flashing cameras, he stepped onto the stage, confident but warm. Sterling Corp has learned a hard lesson about honesty, he began. And today, I'm proud to reintroduce Clara Bennett, our new senior legal counsel, the woman who saved this company from disaster and taught me the value of truth. Applause rang out. Clara stood beside him, trying to maintain her composure while her heart pounded. But Mason wasn't finished. He turned toward her, gaze locked, and spoke directly into the microphone. Clara, you're not just the most brilliant person I've ever met. You're the person who makes me want to be better. I know I don't deserve you, but I want to ask for something. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. At the top, lifetime love contract. He read aloud, voice rich and unshakable. Clause 1. I, Mason Sterling, promise to love, respect, and trust Clara Bennett for life. Clause 2. No traps, no deception, only truth. Clara, will you sign? The room exploded in gasps and camera clicks. Clara stood frozen, tears brimming. You're insane, she whispered, voice shaking. This is a press conference, not a rom-com. So what? Mason smiled, stepping closer. I lost you once. I'm not risking that again. Clara wiped her tears and grinned. You really are the worst lawyer in the world. She took the paper, skimmed it, then met his eyes. I'll sign it on one condition. You have to smile more. Mason laughed, a sound that filled the entire hall, and pulled her into his arms. Deal. Reporters erupted. But for Clara and Mason, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Later, they sat in Mason's office, the handwritten love contract on his desk. Clara shook her head. You proposed in front of the entire world. Aren't you afraid the shareholders will revolt? Let them, Mason said, holding her hand. The only thing I'm afraid of is losing you again. Clara squeezed his hand, warmth spreading through her chest. She had returned to Sterling Corp, not just to work, but to begin something new, a future with no traps, only truth and love. Chapter 10. Love Needs No Clauses. 6 months after the press conference that rocked the city, Clara Bennett and Mason Sterling were no longer the second-hand intern and the icy CEO. They were a couple, an oddly matched pair, as Liam from the 42nd floor liked to say, still reeling from the bet he'd lost about them. Now, senior legal counsel at Sterling Corp, Clara maintained her habit of combing through every contract with the integrity of someone who believed law could still serve truth. Mason, while still running his financial empire, had learned something far more difficult than managing billions. How to smile, and more importantly, how to let go of control. Their life together was surprisingly simple. No glittering galas or champagne dinners. Most evenings were spent making homemade pizza in Clara's small apartment, where her mother, now healthier thanks to Sterling Corp's medical coverage, liked to tease Mason. You've got to laugh louder, Mason, she'd wink. Clara likes here, man funny. And the once intimidating man who used to terrify boardrooms would reply sheepishly, I'm working on it, Mrs. Bennett. Clara would giggle, throw a piece of crust at him, and say, try harder. World's worst lawyer. Moments like those made Mason realize he'd changed. He used to think love was like a contract, needing clauses, signatures, control. But Clara taught him that love is about trust, about embracing what you can't always define. She still wore simple button-downs to work, still argued with him over clauses in late-night debates, still made him laugh with her sharp wit. If you sign this without reading, she once joked, I'll start calling you Liam II. He laughed until his ribs hurt. Meanwhile, Clara continued her quiet revolution at Sterling Corp. She led a team tasked with revising all contracts, making sure there were no more traps like Clause 17. 4b. the one that nearly ruined her. She pushed for internal reforms, especially ensuring due process for employees changes rooted in her own pain of being falsely accused. People respected her now, not because she was the boss's girlfriend, but because she stood for truth. Even Liam grudgingly admitted, "She's the real deal." But Clara's heart never fully left the community center. She missed the kids, missed helping people who didn't even have a voice. One evening, she pulled Mason into the kitchen and slapped down a napkin with scribbles all over it. "Free legal aid for underprivileged students. They need someone to believe in them," she said, eyes glowing. "And I want us to do it." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You want me, a CEO, to work for free?" Clara smirked. "The disruptive intern saved your company, remember? Say yes, or I'll draft a contract." He chuckled and wrapped her in his arms. "Deal." On a sunny weekend morning, they stood side by side in a small hall at Clara's old law school. Dozens of low-income students filled the room, hungry for legal knowledge and guidance. Clara, in a crisp white shirt and jeans, was explaining labor contracts to a group of freshmen. "Never sign anything you don't understand," she said clearly. Every clause could be a trap. Next to her, Mason, dressed down in a soft t-shirt, was awkwardly helping a student draft a scholarship appeal letter. "Are you like a real lawyer?" the student asked. "You look more like a CEO." From across the room, Clara burst into laughter. "He is the worst lawyer in the world," she called out, winking, "but he's trying." Mason shook his head, but a smile tugged at his lips. He watched Clara moving among the students, answering questions with patience, sincerity, and purpose. She didn't need titles or boardrooms. Her strength came from her courage and her unwavering commitment to truth. When the session ended, they sat on plastic chairs, exhausted but glowing. A student had left a scribbled note on the table. "Thank you, Miss Clara and Mr. Mason. You gave me hope." Clara read it, eyes shimmering. This is why I became a lawyer," she whispered. Mason took her hand, voice low. "And this is why I love you. You didn't just save my company, Clara. You saved me." Clara tilted her head and teased. "Saved you?" "I just said, this clause is a trap. You did the rest." Mason laughed, pulling her close. "My favorite troublemaker." They sat there as golden afternoon light spilled through the window, framing a moment that was quiet, imperfect, and real. Clara didn't need Mason to be a CEO, and Mason didn't need Clara to be anyone but who she was, a woman brave enough to face the truth and bold enough to love without conditions. Their life had no traps, only laughter, only truth, and a love built not on clauses, but